So how did we get here? Why are we here? Let's talk about it. Really, I want to bring together that group of personalities and actually have the conversations. Get things off my chest, so to speak. The idea is to, I think that there's divide the world, and that the world is either missing out on it. So I was around a really diverse group of guys who all added up to be the perfect gentleman. With that, I'm got a script here on my computer, and I'm just going to kind of roll through some of this stuff to make sure that I don't miss anything. I want to make sure that this video is a lot more detail oriented. There's not conversations that I personally am planning on shying away from. When it comes to my past, there are a lot of things that I have done that I am not proud of. Most of them are around being drunk or drinking, and we're going to tell the whole side of addiction story in a way, hopefully, that will help anybody who's going through active addiction right now, can teach you something about addiction. If you know somebody who is young, who's experimenting and maybe experimenting a little bit too heavy, if you have a loved one that is just a little bit heavy-handed in their drinking and you think that maybe sharing my story with them may help, by all means do so. So we're going to tell that story in a 7 or 8 part mini video series. That way I can get down into the nitty-gritty of each kind of stage of where I was at throughout the whole thing as I remember it. And then part of that also is I'm going to have hopefully some commentary from some close friends and family that we're going to tie into the video series. So we'll see if any of my friends or family are actually on board to get on camera, but we'll see when the time comes for that. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about. So I had originally planned on this YouTube thing last year, and it was only really centered around my recovery from alcohol. And the farther I get into my recovery, as I'm over year 3 now, the less I want to make whatever creative stuff I do about just that. I love the fact that I live alcohol-free now. I am alive because I live alcohol-free now. And there are certain lessons that you only can learn in active addiction. There are certain lows that you can only feel in active addiction. And there are certain pain points that unless you've been there, you won't relate to. But I don't want to make this channel just about that. So that's why we're going to do that in kind of like its own separate contained series. And that way, if that's the content that is for you, then it's for you and it's there. But we're not just going to focus day to day on that. But we are going to have hints of living alcohol free. For instance, with Find the Good brand, you're going to see their merch all over. I have a hoodie of theirs on the back of my chair. I have a sticker of theirs on my watch box. I'm a brand ambassador for them. You can check the description of this video, and I'll have all my information there if you want to support. But with that being said, let's keep going here. So last year when I had started recording, I realized that I didn't have all the required equipment. I didn't have a lot of the skills practiced. And so the stuff that I made just didn't come off right. It looked incredibly cheap. I didn't know how to operate any of the settings on even just on the same phone that we're using right now. To record this, I was using to record my last set of videos, and they just looked like crap. And I didn't have any scripts organized. I was just kind of flying off the hip, and it didn't really work for me. Now, I've failed at a lot of things, and I've had a handful of cool wins in my career, but this wasn't going to be one of them that I could just fly by the seat of my pants. So I wanted to invest a little bit of money, a couple $100s, in a creator kit and some lighting and some microphones that actually work. And then I took a course on how to operate the camera properly and get proper framing on shots and look at lighting and understand how to practice with microphones and do all that sort of thing to set it up and make it look as good as I can without investing the, $1,000 or $1,500 or this will work for right now. And I'm happy with the way that the first couple of videos that I've been editing through have kind of turned out. I want this to be a kind of a broad view of the way that I'm rebuilding my life and all the different aspects that kind of go along with that. So we're going to talk about some finances. We're going to talk about home renovation a little bit. We're going to talk about, when it comes to the perfect gentleman, there is no way that I personally fit the mold of perfect. I don't think a lot of guys out there fit the mold of a gentleman in a lot of the ways that the term is looked at in terms of how YouTube views it. In terms of how YouTube views it, the term gentleman is some buttoned up English guy who's going to teach you how to tie a bunch of ties and how to dress proper, and he's going to speak like he comes from a fourth generation of Rockefellers. The teeth might match that. And that's really all that you really, when you search gentleman on YouTube, you either get that or you get a Wyclef Jean party song from the Now That's a Hits CDs. You get a boy band, hilarious. Me and my buddy Will were looking at what comes up on YouTube if you search the perfect gentleman right now. There's a lot of stuffy gentleman titled material, and the goal of this is that we aren't that. We aren't stuffy. I'm not going to take myself too seriously. I'm going to make fun of myself. I'm going to cut in edits of me screwing up material. And I have friends that aren't perfect, and we all have different stories of where we come from and how we view life, and a lot of us vote differently. A lot of us have different family setups. All of us came from similar friend groups, and it's a mesh of a lot of different crossover of different friend groups of people that I've met along the way. But there's, 5 or 6 guys who I would love to hear their perfect gentleman story of some of the things that they've screwed up, some of the things that they've gotten right, how they're, improving their lives today and what they're doing with their time today. And hopefully we can have a handful of conversations like that over the course of time. But I wanted to tell my stories in detail because I think there's too many, young adults, and especially talk to the kids who are actually being influenced right now that are between the ages of 12 and 20. They're terrified to have a drink, they're terrified to smoke, they're terrified to drive, they're terrified to vote. And it doesn't have to be like that because life isn't that scary. And there's also a ton of people in that age group, men and women, left-leaning and right-leaning politically, and everything that happens in between the two polar opposites. There's a ton of people who are being influenced and told that there is so much more nuance that goes into understanding why we were the way we were in the 90s versus how we are in 2020 and beyond. COVID changed so much of how everybody does everything online now, and all of a sudden you have kids who are 18, 17, 16 years old fully understanding that they will harm somebody and not understanding the nuance of having actually interacted with those people on a first person basis. It's one thing to have locker room talk. It's another thing to say things that are harmful out in public with no self-awareness. It's another thing further to do it out of spite to actually harm somebody. All I say is that we as a society need to have a lot more nuance around things that are so polarizing and can harm people, and harm people emotionally. They can harm people physically because those are the type of words that can start fights. Those are the types of things that can destroy somebody's confidence. There's a lot of things that we don't take the time to understand the nuances or to have the conversations or to even listen to the other side's points without trying to argue them. And part of being a gentleman, as I see it, is having at least the willingness to sit down and have a conversation with somebody who you may not agree with to see if there's common ground, because once you can find common ground with somebody, it's amazing how far you can take those types of conversations. But people just are simply skipping a lot of steps. One of my coworkers now at the restaurant that I work at, and he is a 23-year-old kid, graduate of a local private university, high school, small town high school raised here in the Midwest. And right out of college, he gets a job for Boeing. He's told me about a handful of the projects that he works on. really cool guy, really good head on his shoulders. Seems to be doing things all the right way. The point of why this came to kind of stick in my head was he wanted to just ask me because he felt like he could ask me an open-ended question, and I told him he could. He's like, when did you start learning about credit scores? Because I kind of think that mine's okay, but I'm not really sure. And I said, look, I'm an open book. I've failed at a lot of things, including financially in my 20s and 30s. So if you want to have the conversation, as long as you're not gonna, throw a jab or throw something back at me for what I tell you that I screwed up, then yeah, we can have the conversation. So he's like, okay, so he asked me where my credit score is. I say it's at 6 and this number, and we talk about how I screwed up my finances as a college kid, pre-loaded credit cards that we all got at college, and never really fully recovered and never really changed my habits. So I did a lot of stupid financial things when I was in my 20s, and then I got into my addiction phase, and so it never really changed. But say all that to say, fast forwarding through the rest of the start of that conversation, we get to the point to where he's like, okay, so this is where my score is at. And he says 743, I think. I think it was 740 something. But my point is that he is nervous about talking about something that is a bragging point for most people. And maybe even if that was where the conversation was going, that wasn't the tone or the approach that he came to me with the conversation with. So I was like, okay, obviously there's been some sort of disconnect, because if I went to somebody and asked them a question 15 years ago when I was his age, 15 years ago, if I asked somebody a question like that, they would have said one of two things. They would have given me a straight answer, or they would have made a joke and laughed it off and said they didn't want to talk about it. So it was a risk to have that conversation then, because two of those answers are either neutral or bad. Only one of those answers actually gets you the information. But if you approached that conversation to the right person, you knew that you were going to get the right type of answer, so you knew who to go to have those conversations with. This kid comes up to me after having known me for literally all of 9 hours. We had worked 2 shifts together at the point in time of having this conversation. He felt that approaching this conversation was okay. I agreed to it, so it was. We go on to have this conversation. I said, you're at a really good place. Don't screw it up. He said, what do you mean by that? And so I said to him, here, I'll show you my exact score on my credit app. And we kind of walked through the Credit Sesame app. I showed him how things are weighted and how things are looked at so that he could get a broader spectrum of the way that, credit works. And I said, basically, always pay your bills in full, and extremely important are your credit card balances to start. Get a credit tracking app of some kind. There's all sorts of kinds of credit tracking apps that you can use. But I walked him through the different weights of how things are, and I showed him where I had screwed up. We wrapped up that conversation, got back to work, and it hit me. It's like, how many kids have all this information available to them online, but they're still scared to approach having a real conversation with a real person who they just want to bounce an idea off of that isn't their parents, because that's the only person that they actually trust with financial advice. And even if your parents are very wealthy, you should have somebody else in your life other than just mom and dad to bounce financial questions off of. Whether that's your friend who's doing better than you, whether that's your aunt who's doing better than you, whether that's your uncle, your cousin, the guy who lives down the street, the guy who you see at the same coffee shop every day, whoever you're friends with. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where they come from. But more people should be having these conversations so that we don't have a generation of people like my generation who didn't learn about credit and taxes and all that sort of stuff until we had a situation that we had to handle. As long as things were going the way that we expected them to go, we weren't worried about the repercussions. It wasn't until we got into trouble with taxes or credit or something like that that my generation had to learn about it. Now, I'm sure that I am not the only one that's in that boat, and I'm sure that there were plenty of kids who got the financial talk from a loved one or family member so that they didn't have to go through that pain. But obviously, by the results of my generation, the millennials, that probably isn't the case. There's probably been a lot of stupid shit other than all of the world-ending catastrophes that our generation has survived already, that have added up to that. So I think that one of the things that I loved about the way that I was raised and with my grandfather was that we had a lot of those real conversations, and we got into fights, and he showed me how to make friends, and we played sports, and he didn't let me win. If it was something that I was better than him at and I won organically, sure. But I mean, and obviously once I got to a certain age, he was an older man, his health was declining, but he still whooped my ass in tennis. That's a fact. There's all sorts of things that growing up that he taught me in terms of decorum, how to be humble in a win and gracious in a loss, how to hold your chin up and get back up, how to have conversations that you're scared to have about topics that you're scared to have, and then understanding the patience that you need to listen. There's all sorts of things that my grandfather taught me because he put me into situations where I had to watch him do something or I had to do it myself with him right there. Great way to learn. But I was put in all sorts of professional situations where I had to put on suits and I had to go into the office and I had to look people in the eye and I had to shake their hand, or I had to learn how to shake a woman's hand more gently, or I needed to learn to be quiet and sit in a corner and just shut up and sit there, learn how to hold small talk. There were all sorts of different things that just being in an office and being in a professional environment that I learned very quickly. I learned how to go to a business lunch and just sit there and listen and eat. I don't know how he taught me that as a kid, and I'm sure I wasn't perfect, but the way that I remember it was the lessons behind all of it, But the important part was that I couldn't embarrass him and I couldn't embarrass myself. Otherwise the meetings had to end or he had to go, and that wasn't on the table. Along with my grandfather, I was surrounded by a diverse, what I would like to call father group. And it was the dads of all my close friends. So you had one who worked in construction and worked on cars, and he was kind of more of a blue collar guy. And then you had one who was a funny, redheaded Irishman in sales. He was the life of the party with a temper to go with it, a great father of boys. Then you had another one who was a giant of a man, 6'5", 6'6". All of his kids were tall, but he was a pastor. But he wasn't a pastor in the way that he was soft all the time, or that he didn't talk trash in sports, or he was my first exposure to somebody who was a pastor who was also a real guy and wasn't scared to be a real guy. Now, he didn't drink, he didn't curse, he didn't smoke, he didn't tolerate any of that, but totally different vibe from the redheaded Irishman in sales who couldn't wait to get home to have scotch, or the blue collar guy who could have a beer at any time of day and just have a great time until he decided to get sober. But I had football coaches, I had basketball coaches, I had the neighborhood dads, I had teachers, I had other male role models in my life that were not my father's. I didn't meet my dad until I was 17 years old. So I was around a really diverse group of guys who all added up to be the perfect gentleman. I always kept my grandfather and his father kind of at the pinnacle of the top of the pyramid, so to speak. But right underneath them was a group of dads who were close. Either they were friends with my mom, they were neighbors and friends of my mom, or they were they were in some way, shape, or form a mentor, teacher, coach, somewhere in that realm of sports. I did not feel the want or need for a male role model probably until well into adolescence, when I got to the age of when you need a physical presence to combat teenage male assertiveness, for lack of a better term. When I looked at the guys who I was friends with in high school and middle school, some of them had very interesting characters for dads, and I learned both good and bad things from some of them. But my closest core group of friends were either exactly like me in that they didn't have a dad that was in the home, or they had an incredibly impressive father who was doing things that I always thought would be cool, whether it was business ownership or having this car or understanding that, you know, they bought this house and we're doing this renovation and that is a big deal. And in adulthood, I can look back and say, you know, I got lucky that I had a group of friends that all were either exactly in my same situation with just a single mom, or they had a really, really good dad. So it was a cool core experience. But yeah, my mom worked in corporate America, and so I saw what that looked like. And my grandfather owned his own business, or I should say, I always say this wrong. He was the creative partner in an advertising firm in the 70s. Or sometime. I'm probably still screwing that up somewhere. I don't know if anyone in my family will ever actually correct me. But everybody had that whole core group of guys all had different personalities. They all did things a bit differently. None of them were close friends. So it was cool to see how that all kind of formed the way that I felt about fatherhood, male role models, and all that sort of stuff, right? So, but getting back to the perfect gentleman being, now I see my generation of dads, my friends that are dads, and really I want to bring together that group of personalities and actually have the conversations. I want to have a cool place where a group of guys can get together and have honest conversations about whether it's cool stuff that we collect, whether it's just hobbies that we're into, whether it's personal issues, professional issues. If there's added content that we can do to help one of our friends grow their business, maybe we do some creative marketing stuff or whatever. But, you know, I wanted to kind of center this channel around the conversations that I think more people should be having, and hopefully we'll see where that takes us. So I want to have open dialogue about where I've come up short and where I feel like I've excelled. And I think a lot of other people can have those exact same conversations, or be able to see where I'm coming from and reflect about, hey, let's avoid this, or hey, I like the way you did that, or maybe we shouldn't do this. It didn't turn out well for him. One of the acknowledgements that I want to make sure that I give is Gary Vaynerchuk has a rule that when content stops serving you, you stop watching it. So with that being said, I also recognize that my content is not for everybody. My point of view is not for everybody. And if there's something that you can take away from one of my videos, that doesn't mean that every single one of my videos is going to be for you. And we're going to try to change up the way that we shoot things. We're going to try to change up the way that we set things. And so the content's not always going to hit. We're figuring YouTube out as we go, but I hope that you'll come along for the ride. But similarly to, there's going to be the addiction series and the business building and work side of things series and a behind the scenes vlog of me helping with another channel. I think that there are going to be certain aspects of my channel that hopefully grow, and some that are not going to get remade every year, and there's going to be some things that we do every year. I hope to have a monthly series of, you know, a couple of things that I do each month to kind of reset my life and plan for the next month, do a series of things that are like that. We're definitely going to hit on watches. We're going to talk about crossing over with some other creators, hopefully, and having collector conversations. One of the things that I would love to do is I have some friends that have some incredible watch collections, and just give them a chance to highlight their pieces. And then hopefully, you know, if they don't want it to go out to the world, they have a cool video of them you know, talking through their watch collection. And there's so many people that watch YouTube content. I think it would be cool for local collectors to be able to say like, hey, I sat down in a cool environment with somebody who was interested in watches, and I got my watches on film and on camera, and I have a cool thing that I can post for myself. So we'll see how that goes. But one of the other things we're going to talk about is I've got a buddy of mine named Marcus. He has a channel called Marcus EDC. He's a gun trainer. He's got all the licensing and all that sort of stuff to do that. But he's big into EDC gears and shoes and watches and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll be crossing over with him. The channel that I'm helping behind the scenes on is called Will Shoot Guns. It's one of my best friend's channels. He's got a impressive start to a gun collection. And so we're going to be going through the continued collection, but more focused on training and gunsmithing and collecting and all that sort of stuff. That'll be more for his channel, but there will be some gun content on here as we go behind the scenes. And also I have a handful myself, so we'll do some crossover content there. But yeah, St. Louis has a really kind of a budding creator scene, and there is a lot of other collabs that I would love to make my way to. Other content creators and the just have curated or have done social media really well for their business, and a lot of that will be more focused on restaurants and the food scene. But you know, just giving shout outs when we're at restaurants or when we pop into restaurants and stuff like that. We'll make sure we try to give proper shout outs, because I love the St. Louis food scene. Obviously I've worked in it for going on 20 years now. So, but with that, the bottom line is that we just want to hit on, you know, the topics that we like. We don't want to get pigeonholed into one set of topics. I had some friends on Facebook say, you should make a watch channel. And as much as I would love that, I don't have the budget to make a business out of flipping watches. And I don't have a vast enough collection right now to just do watch content. As much fun as that would be if I got a chance to go work for Teddy Baldessar or one of those guys that have big channels, I would absolutely love that, but that'll come with time. And Teddy's channel evolved from him talking about Nomos and Junghans and a handful of smaller German brands to having a full-fledged boutique that has Omega and Grand Seiko and a bunch of heavy hitters. And so obviously YouTube channels can evolve into a lot of different powerful things in the business side of things, but for right now, this is just my creative outlet, and we'll see how far it takes us. I think that's crossed off all the things that I had on my checklist of things that I wanted to talk about here. So with that being said, we're going to end with a quick wrist check. I am wearing my Manta Triumph version 1 olive dial on a aftermarket leather strap. And with that being said, guys, I'm out. We'll see you in the next one.